In this review of the week's news, the government takes more control over the city's rebuild, Redcliff School fights to stay open, and Christchurch gears up to be a world-class cycling city. This is CTV News Week in Review. I'm Jared McCulloch. It's another tragedy for Ashburton this week, following the death of a mother and her 3 children, with locals still reeling from last year's shootings at the town's work and income office.
3 hearses have left an Ashburton property where 4 people were found dead. Cindy George and her children aged 5, 3 and 2 were apparently gassed by a car that was left running in an adjoining garage at a Thompson Street home. Police officers in uniform stood in line, bowed their heads and removed their hats as a sign of respect for Miss George and the children as the vehicles drove past in procession. Police say they are not treating the deaths as suspicious but as an accidental tragedy, saying there was no sign of a forced entry to the home and no signs of trauma to the victims. Police say the victims were house-sitting for a family who were out of the country when the owners returned and discovered the bodies at 4 p.m. last night.
The government will control much of the central Christchurch rebuild for another 5 years. The Prime Minister announced this week that another Crown entity will take over from Sarah when it closes down next year.
The government will continue to control parts of the central rebuild, but it's a move that has the full support of the City Council. While Sarah's powers are mandated to the end of April 2016, there will now be another 5 years of transition until the council takes over full control of the city's rebuild. Called Regenerate Christchurch, the new entity will be enacted in law later this year, replacing the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Act, which came into force after the earthquakes. The decision derives from a report by Sarah's recently established Transition Advisory Board, chaired by former Prime Minister Dame Jenny Shipley. Earthquake Recovery Minister Jerry Brownlee said today he would oversee the new entity. In effect, the new entity will have a smaller remit than Sarah and would focus on the rebuild of anchor projects and the precincts in the CBD. Today, Prime Minister John Key said there will be an opportunity for further engagement with strategic partners, and public feedback on the new entity will be open until the end of July. The Mayor says another 5 years of Crown governments on the city's rebuild is a good thing.
I think it's great news for Christchurch. What it means is that we're able to sit down and work collaboratively with central government about what the next steps are going to look like. Quite excited about the idea of moving from recovery to regeneration. That's a step change for the city, so it's a great thing. Council and government, neither one nor the other can do it on their own. And I think an expression that I've been using to kind of judge things by is, what's best for Christchurch? What's best for Christchurch? And I think having council and government working hand in hand, that's what's best for Christchurch.
Also today, Minister Brownlee was on hand to announce its favourite builder, Fletcher Residential, will help develop the $800 million East and North Frame residential precinct. On the eastern boundary of the CBD, the development will build 940 new townhouses and apartments accommodating up to 2,200 residents. And next, Fletcher Residential will purchase 7 hectares of land in the area between Manchester and Mandurah Streets, from just north of the Avon River down to Lichfield Street. Brownlee says the completed construction could take up to 9 years, but the first homes are expected to be complete within 18 months. It's expected construction will begin in November this year, but first up, public spaces will be created in the frame before the end of the year. The properties are expected to be sold for between $400,000 and $900,000. Brownlee says the move is expected to bring more people into the CBD.
A significant part of that was closing up the area of the CBD and making an effort to get more people living close into the central city to create that sort of dynamic that makes cities all around the world very exciting and livable.
And the Mayor agrees.
I think that's going to be great, and it's going to have a real significant combination of housing options. So townhouses ranging from, I think, 400,000 to 900,000 at the swanky end of the field. But because they're all part of a sort of a development that will happen over time, I think that's also going to be really good for the city. The more people that live in the city, the more vibrant and exciting it's going to be.
Chelsea Daniels, CTV News.
He voted against the city's 10-year plan, but Councillor Glenn Livingston is confident investment in the rundown seaside suburb of New Brighton is still on track. It's a promising sign ahead for the eastern community of Christchurch. Last Friday, when the long-term plan was given the tick of approval for the next 10 years, Glenn Livingston was against the idea of selling assets, urging the council to think again on the proposal to get them back in the black.
In the face of factual evidence, the will of our community by 4-1, 83%, the sense of loss of control over its assets is noted in the agenda. This council still chooses to ignore that. On that basis, I cannot support this recommendation.
However, he says although the council's long-term plan has gone through, he's happy that projects focused in New Brighton are ready to start.
Pretty happy. I think that in what we do with New Brighton, for instance, that you not only need to ensure that there's sufficient or even more than sufficient budget allocation.
And he says there's a sign of hope to rejuvenate the suburb in desperate need of help, saying it's coming.
It's a stepping stone because along with this we've approved the Development Authority Development Christchurch to be inaugurated, and what I'm hoping with that is New Brighton, along with perhaps say Littleton, will be one of the first cabs off the rank to actually get projects underway.
But as the long-term plan went through, with councillors voting 8-6 in favour of the 10-year document, the following areas of New Brighton will be focused on. The Christchurch City Council will bump up the budget for the suburb's rejuvenation program, adding an extra $3 million to both the New Brighton Legacy program and the Suburban Master Plan. That's on top of the $5 million already in the pot. The proposed North Beach Promenade has also been taken a step further, with the local body wanting to find out more on the feasibility of the project, with an independent report due by the end of November this year.
So the same residents who want the promenade would also want good coastal protection in the form of the sandhills, and I know that a lot of those supporting the promenade want that too. It's not an either or, so it's how to do it. So that's what the feasibility will come down to, and that will take into account the critical environmental factors.
Another area is the Rafiti Golf Course, with the Christchurch City Council looking to sign an agreement for management rights so it can still be open to the public.
I think really great, and if Rafiti can run that themselves as proposed, that's really good. We did hear one submitter talk about the redevelopment of the whole park. I think it'd be good to join those up as well, so that you don't just get something up and running as a going concern thinking, right, it's fixed. You actually take it further than that and make sure it's regenerated for the future.
And the South Brighton Holiday Park will be on hold a bit longer as discussions continue.
We have some big considerations. We've got the natural hazards and we've got people living there, and an amenity for the east for people to go to. So I think we can come up with something there.
But Livingston says he's reasonably happy about the next steps for the east.
I'm fairly happy with what's been proposed. I think maybe people had expectations that it'd be a lot greater. But, all things aside, New Brighton has ended up with more additional funding than some other places got.
Time will tell for the suburb's future to bring it back to life. Jared McCulloch, CTV News. Still to come, Redcliff School makes its final plea to stay open. Welcome back. There's no other way. Redcliff School must stay open. That's the position the school and its local community made clear to the government this week in its final submission. It's now been handed in, and the waiting continues for the people of Redcliff School. The submission has been made by the school stuck in limbo, unsure if their damaged site in Redcliffs will be returned to. In March, the Education Minister voiced her concerns over the safety of the site, with rockfalls from the earthquake causing issues not just for now, but for the future site. However, Principal Kim Alexander believes they've got a good argument to save their former location.
I'm reassured now that the chance of ever having the future education disrupted in the future is incredibly low. And the other thing I think that will really help the Minister make her decision is that the community has so loudly and strongly said we want our school, and we want our school back on that site.
The board at Redcliff School have been busy trying to answer the worries from Hekia Plurata, saying they're more likely to be struck by other natural disasters than the face of the cliff rolling down again. with options being put forth by the experts the first time round.
The focus of it was whether the site was completely safe or not. So it addressed what would need to be done for remediation, which was the idea of moving the school site forward and then building a protection wall and a bund. So it focused on that and the suggested remediation and the assurances the site was safe.
But now the school has gone ahead with another, working alongside a geotechnical expert to see what disruptions the site could have in the years to come. The report saying the rocks should be the least of their worries.
The potential, say, for tsunami out in this area of Christchurch, and that showed then that Redcliff School was at no more risk, in fact less risk than some of the other schools out on the side of Christchurch.
Besides the primary school's proposal to the ministry, around 2,000 other submissions have been made, and she says she's happy with the support.
People move to a certain area maybe because they love the idea of their children being able to walk to school, particularly in urban areas. They want them to have those active lifestyles, walk to school, be really part of the community, their friends live in the neighbourhood and that type of thing, and that's certainly the case.
One of them is from Labour's Port Hills MP Ruth Dyson, sharing her thoughts on the Support Redcliff School Facebook page, where over 3,100 people clicked like. Dyson says she supports a proposal to have the whole site reduced by 10% in size, to provide for the construction of a bund to be created to stop the rocks from hitting the buildings below. And she goes on to say that geotechnical reports suggest the site is not at any risk from rockfall, proven by experts at GNS Science, the group who analysed results in the Education Minister's report.
That chance of disruption is so remote to almost being non-existent, to the point that the school would have to close. It's easily remediated by the bund and even by positioning perhaps the playing fields towards the back of the school, so if ever the bund needed to be reassessed, school could continue.
It's believed the interim process will take around 6 weeks before the Minister will make her decision. Another wait for the school.
And then there'll be that period of anticipation and waiting again. But we're used to that. We've been doing it for 4 years and we're very happy to do it for a wee bit longer. For 4 years we've worked here at Van Ash and it's always been business as usual, teaching and learning first, and we'll just carry on.
Final submissions to the Minister are due tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. Jared McCulloch, CTV News. It's money that'll help several families pay their rent. The Christchurch Methodist Mission is making the most of a grant from the City Council, and just in time for winter. Chelsea Daniels reports.
The Christchurch Methodist Mission have taken another huge leap to help provide rental housing for the city's homeless. The council has agreed to allocate $130,000 to help the Methodist Mission to find private rental housing for homeless youth and young families.
We've been particularly concerned about some of the most vulnerable people in the city who are currently homeless. And we've heard stories of young people who are living in garages or in abandoned buildings, and this provides an opportunity for them to have a home.
She says that rental prices in Christchurch have skyrocketed 25% since the earthquakes, which is making it much more difficult for low-income families to find a safe and secure home.
The demand is huge, and obviously this is only 6 houses. It's certainly not going to solve the housing crisis in Christchurch, but it is going to provide a home to some of our most vulnerable young people and young families.
The mission is working with young organisations and the Ministry of Social Development to find the most vulnerable cases.
Typical family might be somebody, we know that our social workers are working with families where there's 2 or 3 families actually living together in one house. We've got families where they're living out of their car but parked up a relative's driveway, so the children might sleep inside at night but all the belongings are in the car, and the parents will sleep out in the car at night times.
She says that housing seriously impacts the parenting of children, placing a lot of strain on relationships.
If I talk to our social workers about what's impacting on the families with whom they're working, they say it's housing. They might get a referral from a school saying there's some issues around parenting with this family. They'll go and start working with the family and then see the housing situation that they're living in.
Deputy Mayor Vicky Buck says the growing number of people in our city who are not able to find safe and secure housing is unacceptable. She says that these people have very real and immediate needs and that the council jumped on the opportunity to help. Jill also suggests a way that the government can make a huge difference in these families' lives.
One very simple call that we have made to the government is to increase the accommodation supplement that many of these families are eligible for, because currently the accommodation allowance that's paid here is significantly lower than what's paid in Auckland, and it's something very simple that the government could do to actually take the pressure off many of our low-income families.
In December last year, the council vowed to work with a number of different partners to stop the growing problem of homelessness in Christchurch, and Jill hopes the problem will be solved sooner rather than later.
The hopes for the future is that everybody will have access to warm, secure and affordable housing and a place to call home.
The project will see 6 houses accommodated, 3 for young people and 3 for homeless families with young children. Chelsea Daniels, CTV News.
More than 600 students gathered this week to find out what it takes to be an international leader in a world that demands more and more of young people. Putting the leader in leadership. That's what was being talked about today here at Christ College, seeing a record number of Canterbury high schools travelling near and far to attend this year's event. 2015 marks the 7th Emerging Leadership Programme, and the organiser says it's the biggest turnout of students since its inception, with the conference almost doubling.
Yes, it is. For our hall, it is. I mean, in the past we've had sort of around 500 to 550, so to have 600 is great. And there's a lot of schools that want to send more students to the conference.
Around 600 Year 12 pupils from nearly 30 schools attended to find out more about leadership, many of them aiming for the top roles in their schools and even beyond. Thatcher has been organising this event for the past 5 years and has seen the program develop, saying the course has transformed a lot as time's gone on.
What we've done is we've looked at new areas. One is what we call leadership in the community, which we get the students to talk about what community service they're doing in their schools. We're bringing in more shorter TEDx-style plenary speakers as well, and it's just involved from there.
Schools as far away as Timaru have travelled up for the day-long inspirational talks and workshops, seeing people like Sam Johnson talk to the students about their successes. And one of the guest speakers is one of Christ College's own, now 23. Alex Rees created a non-profit organisation in Sri Lanka, using his passion for cricket to develop life skills for underprivileged children. And Thatcher says he's impressed with what he's achieved.
I knew him when he was at school, and he's a fine young man, and he's somebody that has beliefs and goes with them, I think, and such a worthwhile cause as well, obviously, to help the underprivileged in Sri Lanka. And
he says having guest speakers and workshops like this to talk about leadership is an essential aspect for aspiring leaders.
I think it's important because it's the youth who are the future leaders, and so I think it's important to be speaking to them and to be focusing on leadership at a young age.
It's also very interactive, with a wee exercise at the start requiring young students to take selfies of the event throughout the day, something Thatcher didn't quite take part in.
I wasn't taking part in that, no, and my sons will laugh at that, but no, it wasn't me.
But besides that, it's a time for students to think ahead, being the next leaders of New Zealand. Jared McCulloch, CTV News. Still to come, Scottish culture returns to the city. Welcome back. Will Christchurch become an international cycling city? More than $150 million of funding has been guaranteed for the city's cycleways, but will it improve road courtesy?
Christchurch's $156 million cycleway project has received more money than expected from the government. It was announced last Thursday the government would contribute $41.6 million to fast-track 7 of the city's 13 planned cycleway routes. The 7 cycleways will cost $65 million to build, but the government's contribution means it will now cost the council just $23.5 million. Spokes Canterbury chairman Don Babe couldn't be happier with the outcome.
We've got our own city council who are deciding that cycling needs to be a transport option going forward, and we've got a national government that is saying, hey, we think that cycling's important. From a national point of view,
the lack of driver courtesy for cyclists is seen as a common issue, but Don says there isn't much of a problem as we may think.
The attitude of motorists is not as bad as is often painted in the media. I do about 40 k's a day, so that's I'm not a particularly fast cyclist. It takes me 2 hours. So I'm about 10 hours a week on a bike. And most of the people I wave to and say, thanks for letting me in, or thanks for going wide, or thanks for waiting behind me while I go through a little skinny patch. Very seldom am I getting annoyed because someone has done something wrong.
He says if there are more cyclists on the roads, the more drivers will look out for them.
As we get more and more cyclists, people become more aware of them. Like if you're going down to the stop sign at the end of your road and you see a cyclist going by when you're stopped there once every 3 months, well, you're not really going to think about them. But if you see 5 go by every single day, they become part of the scenery.
The project hopes to see Christchurch turn into a world-class cycling city. However, Don says there's still a long way to go.
We've got a long way to go to be even in probably the top 20 cycling cities in the world. The cities overseas have been doing this for a number of years.
The funding assistance was a part of a national $333 million government investment. Chelsea Daniels, CTV News.
The bagpipes will play again. The Caledonian Hall in Kilmore Street is the latest cultural centre in the CBD to be back up and running. Chelsea Daniels reports.
The Canterbury Caledonian Society is beginning a new chapter in their 130-year history with the opening of their new purpose-furnished hall. The Society's original hall, constructed in 1923, was destroyed in the February 2011 earthquake.
The history is always the history, but history is part of the legacy, but what defines us is what we set for the next generation. We believe this is the next legacy of the society. So the last 100 years or 90 odd years that the old hall sufficed. Hopefully this hall will see the society through the next 100 years.
An active member of the New Zealand Scottish community, the society has more than 400 members who didn't have a place to call their own until now.
As we were spread to different parts of the city after the earthquake, then the concern I have is keeping as much of the group together as possible. When you haven't got a common facility, then things start to splinter a little bit and people will go somewhere else that might seem more attractive. So we're lucky to keep the balance of the membership together. So for us, it's important that we're here now so we can gather what we've got, which is most all of our membership, and then we can continue to provide a centre of development for the Scottish activities.
The Society has extensive piping and dancing programs, ranging from children of ages 3 all the way up to senior activities.
So that's continued part of what we're about, is preserving the heritage for the next generation going forward. So this now will enable us to do that, and now's the time for us to get stock of all that.
He says he's been over to Scotland on several trips and noticed how different things worked over there.
Very few bands would own their own band rooms, and those that do are probably not, certainly not in this league.
The Society's notable collection of historical and heritage Scottish items, including an ornate ram's head snuff box and letters to members fighting in the war, have also been in storage until now. The official opening of the hall was on Saturday, with over 200 members in attendance. Along with the reopening of the Isaac Theatre Royale earlier this year, the Caledonian Hall is another sign of culture and arts groups moving back into the city. Chelsea Daniels, CTV News.
And that's CTV News Week in Review. I'm Jared McCulloch. Have a great weekend.